Welcome into the What Comes First podcast. I'm your host, Keith Cantor. And if you are a Star Wars fan, I have a special treat for you today. You thought they were all dead, but I have a living, live Jedi Master. And I sometimes refer to her as Yoda. And obviously, there's no physical resemblances, but I'm genuine when I say I've never worked with someone that understands people better than Krysia Waldron. And what I mean by that is how people process and take in information and communication, how people work together, how teams reach their full potential. Her work is just phenomenal. She is an executive coach. She does workshops. She has her PhD in social psychology, and most importantly, she's a great friend to FCM. So we're really blessed to work with her. So Krysia, welcome to the show.
Keith, that is such a generous way to introduce me, and it made me laugh. Thank you.
Have you ever even seen Star Wars? And do you know what a Jedi Master is?
I You're starting off with the hard questions.
Yeah.
I have seen parts of Star Wars. I can't say with certainty I've watched an entire movie start to finish.
Okay.
But I know enough about what you're referring to because I hear it every so often. And I think I get what people mean.
Well, please know it's the highest form of flattery that we could offer. It's also sincere, but you did fail. You knew we were coming on a podcast. Where's your hoodie?
My hoodie?
Yeah. It's what they taught me in podcasting school. Number one thing is wear a hoodie.
I mean, had I known,
Yeah. Well, we better get serious. We're gonna lose everybody before we even start. So let's jump in here and get started. I have personally experienced what I'm about to ask, so it's really where I want to kind of go is I was looking over your website and doing some prep for our meeting, and there's a quote on your website that I thought was really profound and really interesting. It says that you work with leaders that have the willingness to experience discomfort in the service of growth. I thought that was a real beautiful quote, but it's a little unusual that we want to move. We generally want to move away from discomfort, not towards discomfort. So could you talk a little bit about how discomfort and growth go hand in hand and why that quote is on your website?
Yeah, well, the answer to why it's on my website is I'm having this happens to me when I'm being interviewed in any capacity where I get this recognition of, oh gosh, like the way in which I take risks in conversation when I'm just talking to an individual person means something different when we're having a conversation that I'll listen to myself later and have to think, should I have said that part? So I'm about to do one of those where I'm thinking, I know the real story of why that's on my website. And, even in coaching sessions, Keith, you know me well enough to know that I'll preface something I'm about to say that I feel a little nervous about admitting or acknowledging. So that's what I'm doing right now. So it's on the website because I've been in practice for 20 years and have had a remarkably, it just feels like magic, the way that my work has grown organically and with integrity. And I just couldn't be more grateful for where the work is today. And because it's been productive and successful, I've been able to get pickier and pickier over time. And maybe one of the first things I realized is that I do much better work, and because I enjoy so much more working with someone who I don't have to constantly reassure that discomfort is important for us to grow. So honestly, it's there because I'd love for folks to weed themselves out before we get started. That if you're looking for something to feel immediately better, and if you want me to make your work easier right away, that's not going to happen. Like, you know, because the people who look for ways to stretch themselves are people who are willing to be uncomfortable. And when we're willing to be uncomfortable, which is to say, usually for people I work with, a little bit out of control, a little bit, in other words, like out of control of the work we're doing together, a little bit unsure about how they're going to show up, like that willingness means that we can really work. And if we're going to spend time together, I want us to work. So,
yeah, this podcast is came out of my willingness to get uncomfortable, because
that's right.
You were there in the retreat when the team said, "Hey, Keith, we want you to be a more forward-facing CEO," and I was like,
yeah,
"Okay, let's start down this path." And I've done a lot of things, but this podcast was an offshoot of that. And my nature as an introvert is really not to get on camera and promote myself, but
me too. Yeah.
So here we are doing a podcast together.
Here we are. Yep.
Yeah. Well, you had mentioned when you were talking about having a successful practice, how do you define success?
I mean, I don't know a lot about Star Wars. I did not wear a hoodie. I can't define success.
Uh-huh.
I really can't define it. I mean, if I'm thinking about it conceptually, I would say, achieving what we set out to achieve at a very basic level. But gosh, like, how often have we gone through an experience that felt like failure, only to realize that the way that we approached that really difficult experience taught us something we never would have learned any other way? And I mean, if that's not success, becoming a better version of ourselves through the experiences that life has given us, and both, the blessings and the obstacles that have come our way. I mean, that's success to me. So, and if I were to say to you, well, it's different for everybody, everyone has a different version of success, I would then even say, and for me, the definition changes over time.
Right.
So it's not just different person by person, but it's different within a person over time or in different contexts.
Right. When I think about success, I think about reaching potential. Like,
well, then we're never going to be successful.
Right. And I was thinking about that. It like gets your mind twisted, right? Because we're never going to reach our full potential, because our potential is always growing if we're learning and we're doing that. And that's obviously what creates some frustration and some areas of angst with, you could call them perfectionists, or those that are always frustrated because there's more out there to always achieve, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm just realizing probably my personal difficulty with even the concept of success as an outcome is that I'm just not outcome oriented. Just like I'm definitely to a fault. So I don't know, like it's just such a shifting, the idea of it is so shifting.
Right.
For me personally.
Yeah. And you mentioned failure and learning. Maybe we should, it would be cool not to use the word failure, but because we are really learning, right? It's really not, we haven't failed as a person. We might have failed at a task or something that we wanted to achieve, but you're still a person, you're still a human, you're still moving on. And if you take that and you learn from it and you get better, you could really classify that as success through failure, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It always ends up depending so much on the time frame we apply. Even when people ask me about like good outcomes or bad outcomes, or good things or bad things, I think, well, whether something is good or bad we often don't know for a long time. It can feel bad and end up having done something really positive and productive in our life or someone else's life or for the business, right? I mean, what is good or bad that's even hard for me. Like there's so few cases where I can say that is universally a bad thing or universally a good thing.
Right.
So I really struggle, which makes me hopefully both a frustrating coach and also maybe a great kind of coach for the people I work with who are very results oriented. Like I present a pretty opposite style in this regard to the people that I work most with. And we work really well together, but there's a bit of you've seen it, like there can be a little bit of a conflict or a debate or a tension that develops when I represent an idea like there's no such thing as success. Think, what is that? And I'm working with a person who's responsible for delivering a particular kind of outcome for a set of shareholders or whoever that person's audience is. So
yeah, I've seen lots of conflict with you in that brown chair and someone else in that green couch. So
yeah.
It's been fun. I just get my popcorn and I watch. Yeah. So we love you, Dan.
Has it ever been us? Have we ever had a
not you and
fussy?
I just submit and listen to everything you say, and it's just easier that way.
one of these days, I hope you don't.
Well, it's
that would be success, Keith.
There you go.
I'm going to call it. That would be success.
It's interesting because there's probably people that can identify with this that are listening. They're results-oriented people, which I am. I tend to just look at the scoreboard. What does the scoreboard read? That tells you how you do it, whether you're doing good or not. And then there's process people that understand that if I get the process right and I continue on, eventually the results will show in a positive way. And, for those results people out there, why do they need to trust the process?
Well, I mean, Keith, you're just going to scrap this interview, I think, because I'm about to say, I don't know that you have to trust the process either.
Okay.
I think sometimes people who are really process oriented believe that you create a process and then you have to trust it and let it work and be patient and good things will happen. And there are a million cases, I'm sure, where that's true. But what I heard first in my brain gets a little fussy with its own self. So I was listening to trusting a process and I was thinking, yeah, but what we really want to also do is be paying attention to the results so that process keeps iterating. Like we're adapting the process to the kinds of things we're seeing happen so that over time, the process of iterating on a set of ideas gets us more and more positive, productive outcomes. But sometimes what I see is people who would say, I'm trusting the process, are essentially putting blinders on to the collateral damage of an imperfect process. So you weren't suggesting putting blinders on, but I guess probably my process is like meta. It's like we have a process and then we keep going back over top of it and making it better and better over time.
Yeah. So we've talked about potential and success and results people, process people. What are some ways that you see that are really common? I'll be vulnerable here. I've shared with you when I wanted to start this podcast or this Be Known project of building my brand, you gave me the sentence of who am I to, and just underline, fill in the blank, right? A little bit of imposter syndrome, if you will. Am I really good enough to go out there in the world and do speaking engagements and do a podcast? What do people want to hear from me? That's just one thing, but I'm sure there's other things where I don't want to say people undermine their success, but that's a hard word. Sabotage would be a hard word, but what are some common themes maybe where people don't reach their potential because they're self-inhibiting themselves in certain ways?
Yeah. I can't help but think of the first conversation I had today with a client who is, I mean, he's a remarkable person. Like he's well known in the city in which I live and work. Knows like everybody, is asked to speak and to represent just giant ideas. I mean, he's just, this is all to say, an incredibly impressive person. And we were talking about his two things, chronic experience of imposter syndrome. And at one point in the conversation this morning, I did the thing I did with you as we got started and said something like, listen, I have a thought, and this might come out in a disrespectful way or maybe even in an unkind way. And I might just be totally wrong, but I'm going to throw it out because it feels like if I'm in conversation with you and I'm having this thought, I should share it and you can do with it what you want. I don't know. But the thought was, you're at a point now where you're aware enough of the ways in which you self-limit because you don't believe yourself to be worthy of standing on stage in front of thousands of people. And I've been sharing with you that I see such a gift in you to lead and to speak what you know is true, that at this point, you're choosing not to move forward with a greater degree of personal risk is a betrayal of yourself. So you can choose to do that and essentially stay home, like in a cozy cottage, and not go out into the great unknown, where at some point you are far enough away from home that you can't really go back, but you're not yet at the place where you're newly comfortable. So you're just in the great expanse, right? Of Dante took us through a journey like that. Joseph Campbell's work around, I mean, there are everlasting stories of a hero's journey. But at some point you have to leave not knowing whether you have what it takes to get to the place you want to go. And you may be waiting in this person's case. This person is essentially waiting for someone to take his hand and safely walk him to the place he wants to go. So I can tell you pragmatically what that sounds like in a person. But at the deeper level, that's what's happening. He's essentially waiting for it to be safe. And it's not going to be safe.
Mm-hmm.
So it's interesting too, Keith, because the closer a person has to the part of themselves that feels connected with many, many people, the part of us that feels like just another person of the world, connected with the rest of humankind, the strength of that part of ourselves really fuels what feels like imposter syndrome as we ascend in leadership.
Right.
So it's a conundrum because as a coach, what I don't want to do is reinforce a separation between a person who is powerful and influential from the whole of others. Because when that happens, and we've all seen that happen, we get a person who is egomaniacal and feels their sense of superiority in a big kind of way. And those people are hard to work for. And I don't even have to talk about what is wrong with that. It's tough. But the degree to which we are humble and we feel ourselves to be in service to the people we lead, when that is almost, when that isn't balanced with an understanding of what our particular gifts are and why sometimes we have to be the one to stand up and be the one to speak, we stay home for too long,
Yeah.
We're not ready to leave.
Yeah, I would challenge anyone if they really want to understand the journey of life and how difficult it is, just go to the library. I don't know do we still go to libraries? They're still around.
I love the library, and I haven't been in 3.5 years.
So there's still libraries. Just go to the biography deal. And you could walk down and pick out anybody's biography. And if you read it, it's not going to be an interesting biography if they didn't overcome challenges,
That's
face
right.
all of the things in life that we're all facing,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's anxiety or stress or depression or
Mm-hmm.
loneliness, or just add in
All of the
whatever it
above.
is. All
Yeah.
of the greats, all of the people that have written biographies have faced those things. If not, like if they haven't, then well, they're not real.
Well, well, and they probably, they either didn't do much, or the way they did it won't, it doesn't motivate us because we are facing depression and loneliness and, fears and concerns for our loved ones. And I mean, we are facing all of those things. So it's one of the, clearly, it's one of the ways in which leaders have the most potential to influence through a connected understanding of their followers' experiences.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah, I was thinking too, even knowing some of the people that you work with, and I was even asking this question earlier, right? Like, why would you work with me? And because you work with some really incredible people, and you were quick to point out how people are just people, and you enjoy your work. So, talk a little bit about what this. When do you find the greatest satisfaction as a coach in your practice as you walk people through their journey? When is it really enjoyable for you?
um, God, I mean, he's all the parts. It'd be easier to tell you what's not enjoyable, because what's enjoyable, I mean, I am in one of those places in life um, where I've always felt grateful for this, that I found very early on work that was perfect for me. When you go through career development, and, if any of your listeners are earlier in their career, they might be, or especially have kids, you have kids who are, making decisions about careers and direction and all of it. You go through all of the, like, who am I kind of work, and what does the world need? Like, what can I do? What does the world need? All of those sort of big questions. And you find the place where your passions meet the world's needs and your abilities, right? And I was really lucky to find that. But especially these days, 20 years into the work, I can even more appreciate how lucky I am that all of it feels enjoyable. I mean, the beginning is exciting because, Keith, when people come to me, they usually don't know what they're walking into. Even
Right.
today, with coaching being as well known as it is, we coaches are very different. We do things differently. And so people don't necessarily know what it is they're about to do when we start working together. But most people haven't had a coach before also. So, like, they don't know from that level either what it might be like. And so there's an entry point that, I mean, it's challenging because I get people who essentially want to pretend to be coached because it makes them look good to their organizations. And that can only go on for so long before I'm not the person to pretend with, like that that won't work
Right.
for me. So very early on, we get to a point where a new client is facing, and how real am I going to be with this person? That's really enjoyable because it's such an opportunity. It's like being a tour guide in a beautiful place that's also a little bit scary and threatening and unknown. But I know how wonderful it is when you're in there, and I know what it feels like when you've been in it for a while and you can come out to a different spot. So I'm really excited to encourage a person in, but they very reasonably aren't so sure. So I love that part. I love the part where we're in the middle of the jungle and it's all a little confusing. And like, I don't know where we're going either because it's your life, you know? So we're just kind of hacking our way through the vines. That part's really fun because it's tough. I like it when something unexpected happens and kind of we're in that together of sort of figuring out, well, we didn't know we were going to find ourselves surrounded by a river. How are we going to get across it? And then, of course, I love it when we're at the other side of something that has been dense and difficult, and I can watch a person feel the pride in themselves and their growth and celebrate with them what has just happened. I mean, what could be better than that part, you know?
Absolutely.
But all the parts are pretty great.
Yeah. I was just thinking, like, do people show up, is it subconscious or conscious when they don't want to get vulnerable or they don't want to be transparent or honest? Like, is it just protection? Like, what is it? Why do people show up that way?
I think it is. I mean, this is just, you know, me talking my words, not science right now. But I think it's the most natural outcome of our social nature. You know, if our survival depends on our positive social standing with other people, and that is especially true if we think about our positive social standing with people who are respected and influential, then we are not naturally motivated to reveal weakness to a person we respect. Or like, so yesterday I was having a meeting with a longtime client, that person's chief of staff, and a new consultant that's been hired. And I think the idea was that I could share some thoughts with the new consultant that would help the new consultant kind of get up to speed faster. And the new consultant people make a lot of jokes when I talk to them, especially in the beginning, but he kept using the imagery of using a scalpel to get into the brain, that I was like pulling out my scalpel with questions or whatever.
Right.
And it's funny and it's totally normal. So not that he's ever going to necessarily know that I had this conversation with you, but if he were to ever, he would know who he is because there's a lot of scalpel terminology going on. But what he's revealing is what is true for even people at cocktail parties who learn what I do, and they say, "Are you analyzing me right now?" Yes and no. I don't know how to answer that question. But we all have a sense of insecurity around, like, what am I going to reveal without knowing what I've just revealed? And I just think it's natural, like I feel that way myself with, my therapist. I think, oh, I know this means something, but I don't totally know what it means yet, and it's not until it like all tumbles out that we both realize, oh, that's Krysia's stuff. I mean, we can do development work for our whole lives, but we've always got our stuff. It's always around.
Yeah, it really, to me, it seems like it goes back to that word uncomfortable, again, that if we're not willing to get uncomfortable, we're not going to grow. We're not going to have, I mean, you can use it in really any analogy, right? When we go to the gym and work out, we better experience some pain and some uncomfortableness, or we didn't really do much. And unfortunately, I've faked a lot of sessions with my coach when she's probably going to listen, get mad at me. But, it's like, you need to come out a little sore, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, if what you want is to grow, and I really believe what I'm going to say here. I think it is. I have a tremendous amount of respect for people who are satisfied with where they are, and don't desire change and growth. I think that until we normalize a choice to prefer stability over change and growth, we're going to keep getting a bunch of fake pretending,
Yeah. So one word came to my mind. It's contentment, right? And I have a ton of respect for those that find, because when I think of contentment, I think of peace, rest, joy, satisfaction in what in my view, as a faith person, what God has provided for them and where they're at in life. And a lot
Mhm.
of people, I think, unfortunately, use that word of contentment and think about being lazy.
That's
And
right.
you
That's
can
exactly
be,
right.
yeah, you can
Yeah.
be content and have dreams and aspirations and goals.
Hmm.
And it's such a fine line, right? And I think people get off in the ditch one way or the other to say, I'm just, moving towards these dreams and goals, and they're not content, or they're not at peace with where they're at in life. And it causes a lot of anxiety and stress because, again,
Hmm.
we're never going to reach our full potential. We're never going to be
Yeah.
perfect, and we can't get there. So I agree with you that idea of being content and being satisfied has such a it's such a respectful place to be, but yet I think society um, uh, they don't want to show up and say that because they feel like they're going to be judged.
Well, that's funny. It's almost like it depends on what context we're in. If we're in a leadership seminar, we don't want to raise our hands and say, I'm totally content with where things are today. Like nothing has to change and I'll be satisfied. But if we're at church and we're in deep appreciation for blessing and and feeling the gratitude for what we have already received, and that it's even better than we would have deserved,
Right.
anyway. That's a different environment in which to experience deep satisfaction and not be asking for more when we've been given so much. So it to me, so much of leadership and um, what is endlessly fascinating about it is that I feel like we're constantly holding a tension between lots of different two good things.
Hmm.
So holding a tension between being satisfied and content and accepting and demonstrating equanimity towards the people we work with, and also seeing the potential for the kind of the push and not accepting less than someone's best, and demanding growth. And I mean, those are two, I mean, they're sort of opposable. Like in a given moment in time, we can't necessarily hold both at the exact same time, but maybe we can move between them gracefully enough that people experience us as both accepting of and grateful for where we are and who we all are, and also moving towards, the best we can be.
Yeah. The older I get, well, number one, the less I know. I figured that out. But the older I get, one thing I have started to learn is that there's, like you say, sometimes there's two things that maybe can't exist at the same time, but they're not
Mhm.
enemies of each other, right? They're
Yeah.
not,
Yeah.
they don't have, we don't have to look at them as one or the other. They're both good, and
Mm-hmm.
they should both be embraced. And maybe we can't truly embrace them at the exact same time, but maybe
Mm-hmm.
1 hour we're content, and the next hour we have aspiration, right?
Yeah.
And we just let
Yeah.
them balance each other out, and we don't get in the ditch. We don't let contentment breed laziness, and we don't let aspiration breed greed or some sort of
Mm-hmm.
unhealthy drive in our life, because we know that's where it can go.
Yeah. That's really beautifully said. Yes. Yes to all of that. Yes.
Well, I'm so grateful for the time you spent with me today, Krysia. You know how much you mean to our organization, how much impact you've had on our organization. We thoroughly enjoy the relationship, and very thankful for the time.
Thank you, Keith. It's
All right.
always a pleasure to talk to you. This is a fun way in which to talk to you. So thank you for
Sounds
including
great.
me and
May-
inviting me.
Maybe we can do this again.
I would love to.
All right. Sounds good.